And that leads us to another story. A New York Times reporter provides cover for the administration rather than coverage. Pretty much what the media does all the time, except now we have actual proof of it. So we have proof that the Biden administration doesn't really care about all Americans. It's kind of obvious because of inflation and their comments about inflation. And in the Western Journal and other articles, you'll see these particular tweets of Jen Psaki talking about inflation. And the administration has really flubbed this messaging on inflation because, look, everybody knows if things cost more. Why would you try to convince them by lying to them that, no, the prices are transitory, meaning the price increases are only temporary? Americans don't care if they're temporary. All they care about is that they're higher, right? And when you say that they're temporary and you've lied to them about so many other things, immediately their first thought is, including me, is, well, obviously they're not temporary then. They're probably permanent, the price increases. So we have a New York Times reporter who decides, his name is Michael Shear, he decides to ask about the ongoing supply chain crisis to Jen Psaki and jokes about the tragedy of the treadmill that's delayed. Psaki does. We'll talk about that in a minute, but listen really closely first to this New York Times reporter, Michael Shear, and how he asks the question in a way that provides cover to Jen Psaki and the Biden administration, rather than actually trying to report the news and provide coverage. We have that clip, and here it is.
Just a question on the timing on the supply chain issue. Actions that the president has taken. It was clear in March of 2020 when COVID hit that the supply chains across the world had been disrupted. Even as the sort of work to fight back against COVID proceeded, it was crystal clear that things were not improving on supply chain. People couldn't get dishwashers and furniture and treadmills delivered on time, not to mention all sorts of other things. So why is
the tragedy of the treadmill that's delayed?
Right, the treadmill.
Yeah, so first of all, you have the New York Times reporter saying, Jen Psaki, well over a year and a half ago, there was already a supply chain crisis. And that supply chain crisis was showing itself in the form of people not being able to buy things like furniture and other household goods that are durable. And as a result of that, the supply chain crisis, Jen Psaki, has been going on for at least a year and a half, which means well into the Trump administration. And so the supply chain crisis, is really, something that's not that big of a deal because, people can't get their treadmills. And as then Jen Psaki, of course, comments on that, like the treadmill. In other words, the supply chain crisis, the fact that there is inflation and the fact that you can't get stuff is because of the fact that you're really rich and you can't get the stuff that you want. And I have a completely different opinion on this, podcast listeners, and I think you're going to appreciate this. I have mentioned this once before, but I wanted to spend a little bit more time on this New York Times reporter trying to provide cover rather than coverage. Because quite frankly, I don't think any of the news agencies are really providing good coverage on this issue of inflation and the so-called supply chain crisis that is global and that the United States is witnessing in real time. So there are apparently well over 100 massive cargo ships, okay? Well over 100 massive cargo ships off the coast of Los Angeles. And they're all just like sitting there in the ocean waiting to come into port. And apparently it takes up to 8 hours. I'm wrong. It takes up to 8 days to unload one of those cargo ships. So, you do the math, right? There are like 100 cargo ships plus that are waiting. And it takes 8 days per cargo ship to unload them. And when I look at that, I don't see a supply chain crisis. I don't see a trucking crisis, and I don't see a Port of Los Angeles crisis. You know what I see? I see the fact that Democrats and Republicans have outsourced and gutted the American middle-class jobs at the expense of profits and sent those jobs overseas because we're having to buy all this stuff from other countries, when in fact, it wouldn't need to sit on ships. It could be made right here and should be made right here in the USA. And instead, when you travel through towns in Pennsylvania and Ohio and Michigan and Wisconsin and throughout the Middle West of the United States, you see town after town that is devastated that used to make the very stuff that now sits on these cargo ships. And the media is like, well, it's a supply chain crisis, because the little peons that make this stuff overseas, they put it on the ships. And since it's all getting here at the same time, because Americans have so much money that they're just buying so much stuff and it's being shipped here at the same time, we just don't have the logistical ability to unload it. And I could care less about that. I know it's an important issue for now, but how about the much more broader issue that we heard from, for the first time in my lifetime, a president who was the former president who actually talked about this issue, namely when Donald Trump talked about the fact that we're exporting all these jobs overseas and we're not making the stuff here. And here is a perfect visual of that. And that perfect visual is of the hundreds, if not, the hundreds plus of massive cargo ships, each one taking 8 days to unload. 8 days to unload of stuff that we used to make and that we're now buying elsewhere. So, and to really bring this home, you have this New York Times reporter who's basically saying, well, furniture during the Trump administration, you couldn't get furniture and you couldn't get big household items. And isn't that true, Jen Psaki? And, and of course she's like, well, yeah, you can't get your actual, your treadmill either. Well, why isn't the treadmill made in the United States? Why? I mean, maybe they are. I'm not really sure, but I kind of doubt it. They probably are made overseas. Most of this stuff is made overseas. And so podcast listeners, I also had to bring this up too because I thought it was really funny, is I saw a meme of the Biden boat parade, which is exactly bringing up all of these ships, of course, that are off the coast of Los Angeles. So the meme was a picture of the Trump boat parade where there are literally hundreds and hundreds of small privately owned boats that had the big Trump flags. And then on the bottom part of the meme, it contrasted the Biden boat parade, which were all the cargo ships off the coast of Los Angeles, right? That weren't, of course, flying Joe Biden flags. But if anything, of course, we're taking billions and billions of dollars of Americans' money and sending it overseas because we would rather have people unemployed in the United States than we would make stuff here and rebuild the country, which is really what needs to happen. And another Babylon Bee article, which I thought was really funny. Health experts now recommend maximizing social distance by attending a Biden rally. Health experts now recommend maximizing social distancing by attending a Biden rally. And there's a picture of this one guy at a Biden rally, and he's like at least 100 feet away from Joe Biden actually giving a speech. It's good stuff. Good stuff. So way to go, Babylon Bee. So next up, podcast listeners, the disappearing Hunter Biden scandals. So once again, Jonathan Turley of George Washington University writes an op-ed that the Biden family corruption is an elephant the media works to disappear. So this week, Turley says, marked an anniversary of one of the greatest political tricks in history, the disappearance of the Hunter Biden scandals. 1 year after New York Post broke the story, new emails were recently released that added new details to what was a raw influence peddling operation which netted millions of dollars from foreign sources. A new tranche of emails connecting President Joe Biden to key accounts prove just how this political sleight of hand was worthy of Harry Houdini. After all, Houdini only made an elephant disappear. The Bidens made what amounts to an entire circus disappear in front of an audience of millions. For both Houdini and the Bidens, the sheer size and audacity of the act contributed to the trick. The fact is, the 10,000-pound Jenny never left the stage. Neither did the Biden scandal. The Bidens made a full-size scandal disappear with the help of the media members who did not want the public to see it. Twitter banned links to reports about the laptop until after Biden was elected president. The media dismissed the story as a conspiracy theory, with some mocking to boot. And so, for example, SV Date says, hey, New York Post and everyone else who got suckered into this ridiculous Hunter Biden laptop story, basically making fun of it as something that isn't true. So Jonathan Turley writes on and on and on about this, and it really goes to that New York Times reporter who was talking to Jen Psaki and providing cover to her about all of the supply chain problems, which are allegedly causing inflation and allegedly causing empty shelves, provides cover to her instead of coverage. I want to replay that clip for you with Jen Psaki and this reporter from the New York Times, just because it's worth listening to again to demonstrate to you how incredibly stupid this newspaper is to even employ idiots like this who basically are almost Soviet in their questioning. Like, dude, what's the real reason there's no bread on the shelves? Oh, well, it's because, people are too busy buying, stuff for their health care, such as treadmills. We have that clip. Here it is.
Just a question on the timing on the supply chain issue. Actions that the president has taken. It was clear in March of 2020 when COVID hit that the supply chains across the world had been disrupted. Even as the sort of work to fight back against COVID proceeded, it was crystal clear that things were not improving on supply chain. People couldn't get dishwashers and furniture and treadmills delivered on time, not to mention all sorts of other things. So why is
the tragedy of the treadmill that's delayed?
Right, the treadmill problem.
So there is the spokesman for the president of the United States literally making fun of the American people and making fun of the deplorables. It's really what she's doing, because she's so disconnected from the average person that lives in the heartland of this country and lives in areas that have been devastated by the policies of both Republicans and Democrats who have exported these jobs.